Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining. I'm Mary Wheatley. It's my pleasure to serve as your Chief Executive Officer of the Scleroderma Foundation, and today I'll be giving an update on our strategic plan. So before I dive into the details of the plan, I just wanted to provide a little background on the planning process to give you some context. So most of you probably know strategic planning is a really important governance tool.
Excuse me, Mary. Hey, it's Angel. Sorry, the attendees are still on hold right now. They won't be able to hear anything that you've started so far. Yeah, the broadcast, it still says that it's on hold.
Well, I started it and I have it as on air.
Oh.
Can you guys hear me okay? Let's see. Yeah, Andrew says he can hear me. Let's see.
Oh.
Yep, they can hear. I think we're good to go. Great, thank you guys, appreciate that. All right, so I just was giving a little bit of overview about strategic planning and how it can be used as a governance tool. It really helps organizational leaders determine their vision for the future and identify goals for the organization. And so it obviously also includes a process of establishing the sequence in which the goals should fall so that the organization is enabled to reach that stated vision. And so we'll walk through what that looks like for us and for our plan, but also just wanted to draw the distinction between two key types of strategic planning that organizations typically undertake. And they're really considered just either internal or external. And so internal strategic planning is typically future focused, capacity building type planning, and external is typically building a competitive strategy for the marketplace. So different plans serve organizations at different places in their life cycle. And our current plan, as I mentioned, is really internal focused, and that's allowing us to build up our infrastructure for the future so that we're better positioned to deliver our mission in a more cohesive way. So all this allows us to align our business and operations to plan for transformational change and growth. And when you think about where we are in terms of our life cycle as an organization, you know, the merger and everything that happened to create the Scleroderma Foundation was just over 20 years ago. And so in the grand scheme of a life cycle of a nonprofit organization, we're really just, I think, kind of here, you know, relatively young, on the upward trajectory, really poised for growth. And so it's a great time in our life cycle to invest in infrastructure and capacity building in order to more effectively deliver on our mission priorities. So for this plan, the National Board engaged outside counsel to lead the strategic planning efforts on behalf of the foundation. And the process included an analysis of environmental factors impacting the foundation, as well as an assessment of current activities and stakeholder input from chapter and national leadership and staff, as well as our members and donors. And so each of these informed the final plan, which was approved by the board last February, refined over the summer, and then shared with everyone at Leadership Day 2020, which was last September. Given the state of, you know, the world at the time and where we find ourselves today, the board was really insightful in keeping the plan focused to a finite time period of just under 2 years. So the bulk of the work has really taken place between last fall and now, and we're just halfway through our timeline. So we really have this year as our first and only full year of work for the plan, with, you know, about a quarter of the year last year devoted to the plan, and then we'll have the final 6 months in 2022. The goal is to really have all of the initiatives completed by the end of the fiscal year, so June 30th of 2022. So as the plan was formulated, top of mind, of course, in the design were the mission and vision of the organization, and these really remain steadfast. You guys can recite these in your sleep. You know, we exist to advance medical research, promote disease awareness, and provide support and education. Our vision was really refined and honed during this process, and I think really captures the spirit of who the foundation is. Our vision is to be a relentless force in finding a cure and improving care for people with scleroderma. I know that these resonate with each and every one of you, and that's why we're able to be successful as an organization. So as the plan was developed, the details really address many facets of the organization. And today we'll walk through the key areas and the strategies that were developed under the plan, but each strategy is specifically designed to address one of these areas, to either establish or enhance our effectiveness as an organization, to simplify or increase our efficiency of our activities, or to leverage our scale and extend our reach as an organization. So let's dive into the plan itself. So the plan is broken into 5 key focus areas, and you can see those here. They really all work together for the good of the organization, and as I mentioned, are really internal focused on capacity building and increasing our efficiency. So these 5 key focus areas include fundraising capacity, donor focus, organization structure, events management, and operations. So each key area has core capabilities and strategies that were developed to support it, and we'll walk through what those are. And as we do, you'll notice that each strategy has a symbol beside it, and it's just marked with an icon noting its status, whether it's been completed, whether it's currently in process, close to being completed, or whether it's actually been extended into the latter part of the plan. And that kind of goes back to what I was saying at the beginning, that it's just really important to make sure that there's an appropriate sequence of events, and we'll see how these all tie together. So fundraising capacity is the first key area, and you can see that we've made significant progress here in really building internal capacity on our national staff team so that we can support all of our chapters across the country in our grassroots fundraising efforts, but also in our major gifts and corporate and foundation fundraising efforts. This has been really exciting to see Jess, who many of you know and have worked with directly, really build out the team and see some big wins early on. Excited to see this continue to build out as many of the other strategies and goal areas really build on this. She's done a great job conducting the training for staff and leadership on approach and strategy, working on building out those portfolios for us so that we can, of course, measure our returns there. Engagement opportunities for our major donors are really important, so we're working to build out some programming around that. And then making sure that we have unified campaigns and initiatives and some meaningful recognition and stewardship in terms of giving societies and the ways in which we recognize our donors. In terms of elevating institutional self-esteem, we have shared case studies, donor feedback, and big wins, and we'll continue to do that on a broader scale as well, just to encourage everyone in the progress we're making in this area and make sure we're all on the same page going forward. But really exciting progress in this specific goal area. As we move on to donor focus, we have centralized all of our donor records in the Razor's Edge system. We have very clear roles and responsibilities for the donor management, and then you can see many of these are in process. And many of them are really close to being completed, but they do build on some of the work that's been done with the database and some of the programming that I mentioned in terms of, building out a legacy society and creating some comprehensive stewardship plans. Of course, as we continue to build out the Razor's Edge database, we will have the opportunity to identify potential donors through some research and wealth screening. And of course, our engagement with corporations will also be a major part of that as well. As we move to organization structure, the main goal here is really to be one Scleroderma Foundation, to be stronger together. So to have one national unified organization. And we've been working to bring all of our affiliate chapters under our national 501c3. We continue those discussions and that work together as a group with our affiliate leadership. We have eliminated the 30% revenue share and monthly chargebacks with our chapters who are under our C3. And of course, as we get our affiliates on board, that will go away entirely. We have conducted some 3 pilots with affiliate chapters, and rather than doing the beta, we are working through as a working group with our affiliates, so we have adjusted that strategy. We've done a great job of streamlining the financial reporting. Mike Hyatt and his team have walked the chapters through that. And again, that's been the chapters that fall under the C3 and really helps our efficiency. And as we continue to grow and evolve as an organization, we'll continue to evolve that process and refine it as well with feedback from all of our chapters as well. The 2 bottom are really the outcomes of the 4 strategies above it, but really making sure that we have appropriate chapter capacity in terms of coverage and function, as well as staff support. And then when we look at our reach and in terms of access from people living with scleroderma and their families and support networks, we really want to make sure that we have the appropriate structure and actual or virtual coverage for all of those people. That will allow us a greater focus on our services and support mission pillars, but still allow us to drive that grassroots fundraising activities. So we have 2 more key areas to walk through, and then I want to open it up to questions, and I have some more details I can share after that. But in events management, you know, we really have relied a lot on events in terms of friend making and fundraising in the past. And so as we face, you know, the conditions of this brave new world and transition a lot of our programs and services to virtual, we have realized a lot of opportunities, and we've done the same with events, but we don't want any of that to go away, right? We don't want to lose the community engagement that we have at the chapter level, and we want to make sure we have a nice mix of all of these things, of virtual and in-person events, programs, and services. And so for events, we really want to make sure we have the appropriate staff support, and so we are actively recruiting for a new national staff person to really help us get our arms around that. We want to make sure that we have templates and toolkits for all of our chapters so that we can set standards and make sure that we are pushing out new and refreshed events that are really synchronized and unified across the organization, that we're not duplicating efforts, that we're being really thoughtful in the way in which we are producing events, and that we're learning from one another, that we're creating a feedback loop and making sure that best practices are being shared across chapters as well. And then, of course, we have an opportunity as we have built up our capacity in our fundraising department to secure national sponsorships for key events, and so have had some success there, and in our direct mail as well. As we look to operations, the key goals and strategies that I have outlined in the other 4 areas really build toward these strategies and operations. And so you'll see that many of these have been extended or are in process for that reason. So this will be kind of the thing that ties everything together at the end in terms of aligning all of our resources with those tools that have been identified and put in place in the earlier areas. So that's everything from our purchasing capabilities as one organization and getting appropriate discounts and buying power there, to looking at our fiscal years across chapters and creating one unified calendar, centralizing our gift entry, and of course making sure roles and responsibilities are really clear across the national office, chapters, staff, leadership, but also making sure that we're creating comprehensive onboarding for everyone so that everyone understands what's expected of them. So that's a lot of information just to summarize what was presented in terms of the strategies there. We're about 50% through our planned timeline. About 1/3 of our strategies have been completed. Half are still in process, and many of those are close to being completed. And then 23% have been extended. So those will be completed in the next 9 months. So I do have some information that I will share in terms of links to resources and mapping our key milestones to these strategies. But I just want to reiterate that these activities are really to ensure that we have a national organization with strong chapters that are serving people with scleroderma wherever they are, that we're operating from one centralized asset base and driving highly aligned activities that are free of artificial constraints. So before I dive into further details, I want to open it up to questions, and let me make sure that you guys can do that. And I'm happy to answer any questions that you may have. So I'm going to unmute everyone, or make it where you can unmute yourselves, and I can see that Andrew and Ann have questions. So, Andrew, do you want to jump in?
I just Andrew. I think I was just saying at the beginning that I could hear you. But I did want to say that thank you for this. This was a good sort of overall, like easy to understand explanation of the process. So thank you for this presentation.
Great, thank you.
So Mary?
Mary, this is Ann Sweeney. My hand was raised for the very same reason, to say that we could hear you fine. But again, Jane Lattice and I are sitting here watching, and we really appreciate this presentation. And this is going to be some really good information to bring to our board. So thank you.
Great.
This is Mary. Can you hear me?
Yes.
I just want to know if we will be able to view this webinar at a later time.
Absolutely.
If we can refer back to it. Right. Okay. Thanks.
Yep. I've actually shared the slides on Inside SF, and I will post the recording there as well and send you guys a follow-up email with a link to that.
Thank you.
Afternoon, John Mahalski from the Michigan chapter. Three different questions from your presentation. One, looks like the vision statement has been modified a bit. Is that true?
Yes, that was refined, absolutely, during this process.
Okay, so all the chapters should be updating their vision statements then.
Yes, that would be great.
Okay. On one of the slides that you talked about minimum geo requirements for chapters. What do you mean by that?
Say that one more time.
Minimum requirements for the chapters. Yeah, right down. Access. Yeah. What are you meaning? Minimize requirements for geo coverage and function.
Absolutely. So that's looking at our chapter capacity across the country and looking at where we have gaps in our geographic coverage and our functions. So we have some chapters who, so Northwest, for example, based in Portland, because of where they are and because some of the gaps in the Northwest have been really kind in extending their resources, as has Rocky Mountain, as have many other chapters, to geographic areas beyond kind of their original design and purpose. And so we want to be thoughtful in assessing the capacity of those chapters. Do they have the support they need? What are the minimum requirements for a geographic coverage area, or a catchment area, if you want to think of it that way? Do we want to make sure that if you're covering an entire state, for example, that you have at least one paid employee? If you're covering more than one state, what's kind of the budget, and making that scalable so that everyone has the resources they need from national to meet the needs of people living with scleroderma in those areas.
Okay. And then finally, you mentioned about the national sponsorship or national donors. Besides the few of the drug companies that we all know about, has anyone else been added?
Yes, we've had some good success in establishing a new named gift for our research program, as well as securing a new multi-million-dollar bequest. But in terms of sponsorships from individuals or non-pharma corporations for events, that is certainly an area we are looking to build out.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mary?
Yes.
Hi, it's Marsha Walker. Hello,
Marsha.
everyone. First, Mary, thank you for putting this together. It's It's concise and clear and answers questions that I'm hearing from all over. So everyone, I am on the National Board of Directors, and I also serve on the Northwest Chapter Board. So one of the questions that, well, I'll do a little bit of a backstory here. We, during COVID, we all experienced some real difficulties, particularly in being able to, our revenue and ability to do additional fundraising has left us in tough spots. One of which is having had to lay off staff. And so if you could just talk a little bit more about the paid employee, wanting to have one paid employee, and how that might get rolled out and when.
Absolutely. So I think it's definitely important, as we go back to kind of John's question, to consider the capacity and where our gaps are and how much support is needed at each chapter level. But our overall goal is to make sure that all of our chapters are adequately resourced. And so I know there's some concern in chapters thinking, you know, well, we have to pay for that employee. But the idea is that with pulling of resources and increasing our capacity at national with national fundraising and bringing all of our resources together, that we'll be able to have more consistent support at all of the chapter levels. And so, you know, I don't envision that we'll flip a switch and say, and now everyone has a staff member. We'll be working with each chapter to determine what's appropriate, if it's a half-time, if it's a full-time. Definitely don't want to force the issue if a half-time person is needed, if there's a really engaged board, you know. It's really, I think, a case-by-case basis, but we do want to make sure that there is staff support for every chapter so that it isn't falling just to volunteers, because it has been overwhelming as I've talked to chapters, that it has fallen to volunteers. And so we want to make sure there's adequate support there. In terms of a timeline, it's really, we hope to have the structure in terms of the HR reporting structure, consolidated or consistent job descriptions and all of that all completed next year by the end of June. And then the idea would be recruiting based on those discussions we've had with chapters, with, of course, input from the boards and selecting the appropriate individuals at the local level. Does that answer?
Thank you. It does. It answers it very, yeah, thank you very much for that.
Great.
Okay, Mary, it's Mary Beth Tyson from the Washington chapter. I'm not sure whether I've raised my hand. I don't know whether you're calling on people, but I had put some questions in the chat. So I think what would be really useful to know would be, what are the objective quantifiable measures being used to gauge success against the goals? So we don't see those in the plan.
Right, so it's a couple things. One are the key milestones, which are more time driven in terms of the outcomes associated with each strategy. And so I will walk through those. And I know we had talked about some mapping for those, so I've certainly made that available as well. But the other is, I'm sorry?
I've looked at that.
Great, great. So that's one piece of it, but then there are also the metrics that are tied to each of those strategies. And so that's really looked at on a staff level for the staff that are responsible for each of those. But I can give you some examples, let's see, as we go through. So if we look at the third strategy here, this is the milestone mapping with the status of each of the milestones. And certainly we'll go back to our Q&A session here, but if you look at create formal major donor portfolios and measure returns, Jess and I are looking at that in terms of the portfolios themselves, who the gift officers are for those portfolios, and then of course some key metrics in terms of dollars raised, proposal conversion rates, and some development metrics and best practices there. For some of the others, they're much more cut and dry in terms of implementing engagement opportunities. It's simply that those opportunities have been created and then a list of those opportunities. But for the dollars and cents ones, it's a lot easier to track the metrics for those, as I'm sure everyone can.
Right, so for example, in in a plan where you had a goal, like there's no goal stated in here that says we want to specifically increase donations by a certain amount of money and then how we're going to get there. And part of that, then you might have sub goals where you would identify a plan with, you know, kind of somebody responsible for going after corporate donations, major donor portfolios, those with metrics assigned to each of those. We don't see any of that in here, and we don't see development of any plans to actually do any of what is referred to here as strategies. The milestones have more to do with hiring somebody, which is increasing expenses associated with those. But in terms of then accountability for that, that's not something that we can see in the plan. So it makes it hard to measure whether or not it's been successful.
Right, and that's why it's so important that we share those that donor feedback and the big wins in the second part. But again, this is really a capacity building and an infrastructure expansion plan, which is different from some other strategic plans. But the work that you're mentioning is absolutely part of a lot of these strategies at the committee and the staff level. And I saw, Mary Beth, you also had a question about the organization life cycle, and I can share some background and literature with you on that as well. Some of it is subjective in determining where an organization is, and there are just some descriptors that help you kind of understand, are you in adolescence or early adulthood and those kinds of things, but I'm happy to share that with anyone else that's interested.
Right, you could put them, you could map them on the axes of the chart that you did. That's normally on that, so yeah.
Did you have any other questions?
Mary, this is Debbie Hausler with the Ohio chapter. Hi. I'm wondering about, on one of the slides, you were talking about the think tank, getting like representatives and volunteers to be part of a think tank. Are you actually going to be reaching out to people for that, or is there going to be an opportunity for people to, you know, raise their hand to be part of that? I know that our board has been very interested in where we are with all of this. And so, first of all, thank you, because this was very informative, and we will definitely take this back to the board. And I think it's going to give them a lot of peace of mind and a lot of information that they've been kind of asking for. But I think that we might have some people that would be willing to raise their hand possibly to be part of that think tank. So I was just wondering if you could give a little more information around that.
Absolutely. So kind of the first step there is getting our events person on board, which we hope to have in the next, I would say, 30 to 45 days. So we're close there, but really need that support for the development team to be able to do that next step in terms of the think tank. But absolutely, we'll be doing broad outreach to make sure that we have the right people on the bus in terms of capturing feedback from the community. But appreciate everyone being proactive. If you have names, we appreciate those anytime. And so we're happy to collect those now.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. So I think I was able to clear all the questions. Let's see.
Hi, this is Sharon with the national chapter. I just, with the, excuse me, with Greater Washington, D.C. chapter, I just added a question.
Yes, I see that. Sorry about that.
Yeah, it's kind of long, so sorry about that. You indicate in the slides that national plans to bring on one person to work with the affiliates in the ED function, so that we have an administrative person for each of the chapters. So just one person. And I mean, I keep hearing that this is going to happen, but where is the funding for that? And when is that going to happen? 2022? It's a great idea, but how is that actually going to roll out, and when?
Right.
And where's the money for it coming from?
Right. So this kind of gets back to, I think, Marcia's question as well about staff support for all of our chapters and making sure that's consistent. So as I shared in response to that question, the first step in that is creating the HR structure. Of course, as you know, you and Mary Beth have been really involved in our discussion with our affiliate chapters to make sure we have the commitment to move forward so that we can extend those resources out equitably across our chapters and scale that appropriately. For some chapters that are really large, more than one support person makes sense. So Andrew's team is larger than Rocky Mountain's team, for example, and that makes perfect sense when you look at the scale of the programming that they're doing. And so we want to make sure that we have a capacity assessment for all of our chapters. So the first step is getting the commitment to bring everyone in. The second step is looking at our pooled resources as well as our increased resources through all the capacity building that we've done and the capacity planning that we've done. And of course, the National Foundation has significant resources as well. And then looking at how we allocate those across the chapters based on the capacity that we have. So we'll do that work in the first part of next year, in the first quarter of next year, and have all of that completed in terms of the capacity, what the scale and scope of that looks like, as well as consistent job descriptions and HR structure and all of that. But I think it would be ambitious to talk about recruitment of the actual people for those who it will be new for before the end of the fiscal year. I think that'll really be in the second half of next year that process will even begin. But I think we'll have the structure and everything in place before the end of June of next year.
Well, I have a really concrete question then. When our chapter met with Robert, before you came on board, with Robert and Kaz about coming on our chapter, which is a small chapter, financially speaking, although we cover 3 jurisdictions, 2 states and the District of Columbia, as you know. They didn't have any support to help us deal with, they had no structure, and we are all volunteers to help us deal with dissolving our 501c3, let alone continuing to function. And we function with volunteers. So if you don't have, it seems like we have a chicken and the egg here, is that if you don't have anyone to support the chapters as they come on board, then you're anticipating waiting until they come on board with national, but then who's going to do the work?
Right, so we do have resources to help with the transition within our national team. We can definitely talk about that offline, and I know I had said I set up some time for you and I and Mary Beth and what that looks like in a concrete way. But then in terms of kind of business as usual, there will be a period of about 6 months that chapters who don't currently have staff, I mean, just to be realistic, probably will still not have staff just as we get the structure and everything rolled out. But I think we can triage appropriately and work together on what that looks like with our support from national as we move forward in this more cohesive way of delivering programs and services, that there's a lot that we can pick up and help with.
Okay. So I have one other question. I hate to gobble up lots of time, but you indicated that we are working with these chapters, all of us are working with financial and the affiliates with how financial reporting will work once we come under national and or join with more closely with national. And I haven't worked with national or Jess. We've been told what we're going to do. So, and there really hasn't been any working with us. This is how we want things done, and here's what you're going to do. And so I see a disconnect in what you presented and what's actually happening when it comes to financial reporting.
Yeah, so there are certainly some things that are, kind of concrete and that because of the nature of the system and the nature of who we are as an organization that have to be a certain way, and because of, generally acceptable accounting principles and the way that our report and roll-up work have to be a certain way. But it has been an iterative process with our chapters in terms of refining the budget and reporting process, and certainly within our fundraising capabilities and reporting process. I know that that's been very open and very collaborative in terms of, you know, requesting reports, and, you know, there are kind of standard reports that are out of the box in terms of what National is suggesting for use, but then a total openness to request new reports if there are ways that chapters want to look at that. But we can certainly address that offline as well. And I see
Okay.
one more. Oh, thank you, Sharon.
Thank you.
I see one more question from Matt with Delaware Valley, talking about, you know, obviously in that Philadelphia, New Jersey area, a large pharma and life science community. And so how do we plan to utilize the local chapters for national sponsorships? We really envision that as a partnership and working together on relationship management and making sure that we're talking and working together so that we are maximizing our potential for partnerships from each company. So for example, if a local chapter is working with a company on a sponsorship for an event, we may approach and talk about, you know, we're thinking about an overarching proposal that would be, you know, a 6 or 7 figure gift. And so how can we fold this in and make sure that we're being very donor centric and making it as easy as possible for the company. But this will all be an evolution. We're definitely open to feedback, really want to make sure that this isn't one way, want to make sure that it's interactive and that we're including feedback along the way and refining and improving our process as we roll these things out. So definitely welcome input, welcome suggestions, recommendations, especially for these existing relationships. I think that's really, really important because our intention is not to swoop in and take things away. It really is to maximize the existing relationships for the good of the overall organization.
John Mahal, can I just do a follow-up on that question? What establishes that as National would help us drive towards, let's say, a local sponsorship, let's say a car dealership and stuff? Yes, we might be able to get a larger contribution nationally, but then how would the local chapters be able to get that money to help their local event as they have been funding in the past? So to make sure that, yes, we increase the national presence and gift, but we're making sure that the local chapter gets the funding that they need to be able to put on their local events.
Right, so as we develop those proposals, we can actually include multiple parts to that so that we can make sure that a percentage is going to the chapter and that the donor can designate their intent and purpose there and say, you know, we want to maintain this part of our donation to go to this chapter, and that, of course, that will funnel through and go back to that chapter. So that's something that I've worked with donors on in the past, and that we can spell out in the proposals on the front end and then the agreements on the back end. And then with all of our new systems, it's a lot easier to track that as well, so that there's transparency at every step of the way.
Okay, so that will be a joint effort between the local and national presenting it to the sponsor versus just one or the other then?
It really depends on the sponsor. So not for every sponsor. Some may make sense to keep it the local level, but we just want to have visibility into what the relationships are so that we can determine what's the capacity, the inclination for them to potentially engage at a larger scale, so we can make sure we're not leaving dollars on the table.
All right, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. So in the interest of time, I do have a transcript of the question, so I will follow up with people who I didn't get to your questions, but just want to run through quickly. Again, I did put these slides on Inside SF. So let me show you how the milestone mapping works. These are the strategies in this far left column that we've walked through on the prior slides. And then when you've seen the milestone updates, those are on the right side. And so there are more strategies than there are milestones. And so some of the milestones tie to more than one strategy, as you can see here, so they're duplicated, and then using the same symbols to determine whether they are completed, in process, or they have been extended. So I am just going to flip through these pretty quickly, but let you go through those in your own time and then follow up if you have questions, just so you can see kind of what these look like. You know, some of these I think we have actually addressed in the Q&A as well in terms of kind of what comes first. And then I will just end with, you know, I've saved these slides under chapter resources in the strategic plan folder. I will also be sure to share the recording there, but I'll also send an email to everyone that registered, whether they're on or not, as well as a quick follow-up survey so you can share additional feedback with us. This is also a link to the presentation from Leadership Day, just so you can see, I know it visually looked different today, but so that you can see how everything ties directly back to the strategies that were shared on that day in September of last year. And then a document that lines up the strategic plan with the key milestones in a PDF that is just has each goal area on a single page. And then finally, just to save the date for our Leadership Day on September 18th, we look forward to having all of our chapter staff and leadership, as well as our national staff and leadership, participate in that day. And finally, just thank you all for your leadership and service on behalf of the foundation. We are so grateful for the important work you do at every level within the organization, and it makes us better and stronger together. So thank you all so much for attending. Thank you for your engagement. And if I did not get to your question, I will follow up offline. But thank you all, and I hope you have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks so much.